Hi all, and welcome back. So in today's session, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and rather than training and moving around, I wanted to talk a little bit more about how I structure and program my own sessions with my clients, either in person or in terms of online coaching. And also to the degree this applies to my group classes as well. So hopefully it will be useful for you. Maybe you're beginner, total beginner starting from scratch. You want to learn a little bit more about how to program your sessions. Maybe you already somewhere along the line and you maybe plateaued in terms of some skill development, or maybe you're advanced athlete and you want to have a little bit more insight on in kind of other people's approaches. Okay, so hopefully regardless of your level, this is going to be useful for you. So just quickly, kind of my approach and the thing that I teach primarily, as we all have our own different niches, different approaches, different training modalities. I personally like to kind of teach hybrid mobility, flexibility, calisthenics, so weighted calisthenics, body weight based calisthenics, working on some skills in terms of general strength and mobility, and also relatively recently more kind of barbell basic squats and lifts, deadlifts, and so on. Okay, so starting from the very beginning. So what the most important part is establishing your own goals. So what are your own goals? Really have a think about few main things you want to work on. So rather than starting with 9 different skills, 9 different goals, and not making any progress, think about, I personally like to say, 1 to 3 main goals, even better if there is not much overlap there, okay? But quite often there is some overlap as well. So be really honest. So maybe you want to work on press to handstand, great. So then we can divide it into strength component, into skill component, flexibility component. Maybe you want to work purely on hypertrophy, that's also fine. Maybe you want to work on mobility, maybe rehabbing certain injury. So that's also going to dictate how you approach structuring sessions, but be very clear with the goals. The less is more, I would say here. Second of all, what's your starting point? So we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. Be really brutally honest here as well. So can you do 5 push-ups? Can you do 5 chin-ups? Maybe you want to work on first chin-up. Maybe you're working on the muscle up, ring muscle up, bar muscle up. But can you actually do certain baseline strength? Do you have baseline strength requirements like a chin-ups or pull-ups or dips? Okay, so be really honest about that. Can you hang for 30 seconds? Can you squat? What's your squat depth? Do you have any mobility restrictions? If you want to learn on how to develop a handstand, do you have decent amount of shoulder overhead mobility, shoulder flexion, and so on? So really be mindful of what your starting point is. Maybe you're a complete beginner. Again, maybe you're starting from certain level. That's fine. Maybe you're already quite far into training, so you don't want to start with the basics. You want to jump straight away into a bit more skill refinement and so on. So just be mindful that I really like the metaphor here. You don't want to start building a castle on a swamp. So create the foundations. There are many people advertising, many coaches advertising, you really want to spend quite a long time working on a basic mobility, especially if you have some restrictions before kind of progressing further. And I kind of disagree here, because you can work on mobility parallel to strength, because if you're utilizing strength training with fairly decent or full range of motion, you can already kind of develop quite a decent amount of mobility. And mobility, the range of motion and flexibility you will develop later on throughout the work. Okay, rather than spending a ridiculous amount of time initially on basics on mobility, I like to straight away start with my clients. Let's begin with the strength work and then gradually build up from there. Okay. Next thing would be Are you currently injured? Do you have any excessive history of injuries? Do you have any medical conditions, any painful conditions that might be impacting your sessions, your training? And this is a very complex topic, but let's say, for example, you have pain, you have joint pain, maybe you have shoulder pain. It really depends the level of the pain, the amount of pain from 0 to 10, for example. Is the pain getting better when you move that specific joint, when you do some strength training? Is it the same throughout the session and afterwards? Maybe it gets worse after training. So you really need to take all these kind of parameters into a whole equation before adding more load, more stress. And as always, you can, especially if you're starting with training from scratch and you have certain serious conditions that you need to kind of be mindful of, please consult with your GP or PT or physiotherapist, or even better if it's specialist, and even better if you know that therapist or any healthcare professional that you see is actually doing some form of training, because relatively often you'll find out that people that don't have any training background like to give advice. Don't move, you need to rest, you need to do RICE protocols, without actually being practitioners on their own. So I think there can be a really happy kind of medium here. So find someone that actually knows what they're doing about and also walking the talk. Okay, so far, just to summarize, setting your goals, 1 to 3 goals max. Where you're starting from, what are your strengths and weaknesses, maybe some mobility restrictions. Are you injured or managing some certain health conditions? Really be mindful of that, because although training through some pain is good, you don't want to push through excessive pain. Okay, so sometimes it's good to address that and be aware of that. Next one will be very important, and that's actually how much free time and energy you have. As we know, physical training is a stress. It's a positive stress, but it's stress nevertheless. And adding more stress to your already busy lives, for example, you have busy schedule, you have a family, you have your various responsibilities, and you have limited time for training. So you can still have really good productive sessions, but you really need to be mindful of how long those sessions are going to be. Maybe you have half an hour every other day. Perfect, you can squeeze a lot there. Maybe you have 60 minutes, maybe you have hour and a half. It all depends, where you are right now in your life. Okay, so really be mindful of that. And then also what kind of equipment you have, and what's the environment you train in. It's very important. Okay, so really be mindful. We're gonna touch upon this a bit later, but going back to this is your schedule. Recovery is crucial here. So that's something that I've learned in a very hard way. So your recovery, in translation, your sleep, your overall energy levels, your nutrition is really, really, really important. Once I started, I never had, for example, issues with consistency when I was training, and motivation, but I didn't really make much progress. Once I started eating more, properly, and sleeping more, focusing on minimum 7 hours of sleep per night, and even training less than I used to, my progress started going uphill. So just something to be mindful for. So goal setting, where you're starting from, any potential kind of limitations, any painful conditions, health conditions, how much time, energy, what's your schedule, be mindful of that, and then what kind of equipment you have. So hopefully that's clear. This is kind of the intro part. And now kind of the main programming concepts and kind of main training principle is, if you want to progress, is a progressive overload. Okay, so some people can they like to train for the sake of training, that's fine. And usually, you still have some progress. Okay, there's also time and place for that type of training. But we do want to have progressive overload when we're programming sessions, or at least being mindful of progressive overload. And they're just fancy kind of terminology of saying, so your body adapts to challenge. So once you start to constant challenge, once you start adding challenge to your training, your body will stop in a way or stall with adaptation. Okay. That being said, it's rarely that linear, at least at some point. So how can you apply that? So either the simplest way, for example, if you're doing weighted stuff, is adding more weight every session, maybe every week, maybe every month. But then again, you also can add reps, for example, if you're not working at weight. So adding more volume. So adding reps, 1 rep extra every session, every week, maybe per month, and so on. Playing with tempo. For example, you have concentric part in the chin-up or pull-up, where you pull up, being explosive, then pausing for a second maybe, and then going down for 2 to 3 seconds, being very controlled. Maybe you're building up your chin-up, then you want to go really slowly, 6, 8, 10 seconds and more down. So having more controlled eccentric or lowering down portion. Reducing potentially rest can also be a nice way to progressively overload. Just be mindful of that. And then also in general, more subjective, maybe objective as well, ways of progressing is, just kind of having overall better kind of feeling, sensation of movement, more control. So as you can see, based on these, there's no like linear way. So sometimes, you will experience with certain movements, certain skills, you're just progressing, adding weight. Sometimes, not just sometimes, often that's gonna, that's gonna stop. You will plateau, and then you need to change certain parameters, play with those. It's a troubleshooting, similar like in rehabs. You kind of have over outline of the plan, but don't get too obsessed with that plan, because any plan is there. You can't play with parameters. You can change, you can troubleshoot. See what works, what doesn't work before, in order to progress further. Hope that makes sense, okay? So you don't need to be like crazy. You don't need to worry about if you're not progressing linearly every single session or even every single week or month, but just trying to do slightly better overall is what matters, okay? Next one is, again, very kind of complex topic that we're going to try to simplify. There is so many like recent findings here, kind of belief systems, dogmas, and those are training splits. So once you established all these kind of previous elements, so goals, your starting point, time availability, your schedule, your starting point, you want to pick your training split, and that will change throughout your training. So the simplest ones are full body, for example. So full body, something that's great for not just beginners, for everyone. I really like a full body split. You can train 2 times per week, you can train 3 times per week or more, and you can really squeeze everything here. You can start with skill training, you can do some mobility, you can do strength training, and it can really help with recovery, especially if you have days in between to recover, okay? You might not be able to push as much with every single drill you do on those sessions, but overall it covers quite a bit of good work, especially initially once you're starting to kind of cover all bases, to create a really good capacity for later on. And then once you get to a certain level and maybe you notice some plateau, or maybe you just want to make it a bit more fresh, absolutely nothing wrong with that. You want to start playing with other splits, and that's, for example, upper and lower splits. So one day you do upper body session, or skill development related to upper body, strength training, and so on. And other day you would do same for lower body. I'm currently doing this split and I am loving it. And then also push-pull legs, bro splits. They can also work quite well. So basically it allows you almost to train every single day. Again, depend Well, it depends on your availability, on your schedule. So it's great, if you really want to push intensely on certain like skills, like for example, learning handstand push-up or learning, getting stronger with the weighted chin-up and so on, working towards one-arm chin-up. And then obviously, like anything in life, there can be a combination of all these elements, healthy combination of all these elements you can play together. But to begin with, I would always start fairly simple. So, full body split session, or maybe with days of recovery, and then going into splits once you kind of stall or you want to add a bit more variety, okay? So the next one would be sets and reps, okay? So you don't need to guess here, just try to match, kind of go back to retrace your steps back to your goals and think about what your goals are. So if you're working on strength, I mean, these again parameters are just kind of reference points. You can always kind of mix and match. But if you're working on pure strength, rep ranges from 1 to 3 or maybe 3 to max 5 or 6 reps per set, and working on 3 to 6 sets with really high intensity is good. Generally good way to start with this, focusing a lot on effort, pausing, resting of 2 to 3 minutes. I personally never rest less than 3 minutes unless I'm very comfortable with drills, or if the drills are a bit less intense, then I reduce the resting time. Okay, if you still kind of lack, if you lack your breath, if you need to catch your breath and you're going into next set, it's probably going to suffer. So especially if every consecutive set goes to shit, rest a bit more, especially if you're focusing on skill, okay? And then if you want to work on hypertrophy, the classic one, 6 to 12 reps, roughly. Again, it's not kind of exact science, with, pushing closer to failure, and then having 16 to 90 seconds here as for resting, maybe up to 2 minutes should be also fine. And then endurance, if you're working on endurance, anything 12, 15 reps should be okay. Not something that I train that often, but every once in a while, for example, my group classes, I like to, if I'm always focusing, just on max strength, low number of reps, higher number of sets, I will occasionally throw in a little bit of conditioning here, really reducing the intensity and load, and then going for higher reps, just to have kind of overall good balance. And you can always, again, play with this. So just to summarize, if you're working on strength, lower number of reps, 1 to 3, 3 to 5 or 6 maybe. In terms of sets, you can play with these. Usually, if I'm working more on the strength side of the thing, I will do anywhere from 3 to 6 sets. Okay, so more sets, less reps, more intense, and then hypertrophy, kind of average, medium number of sets, 4, 5, 6 sets again, but going higher with the number of reps. Obviously, intensity will have to go down here. And then endurance, I would do this very small number of sets, 1, 2, maybe 3 sets, and going really high number of reps, but that's every once in a while, okay? And then probably very important if you're working on skill, which all of my clients are working at least on one form of skill, let's say handstands. So initially, if there's no balance component or there's not much like room for error, we do like sets of like 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds, building up towards 3 to 4 sets of 60 seconds. Let's say chest to wall holds. But then once people start to play with balance, then we can add either time, so put timer 5 minutes up to 10 minutes, and then really work, like have attempts of 3 times in a row and then mini breaks, just so you don't pick up bad habits, and really trying to stay fresh and accumulating as much as possible. Good work here, just being mindful it's not maximum effort. So if I'm holding a handstand and learning handstand, only rarely I'm going to try to do max holds. I want to do sub-max effort and really focusing on quality here. That can eventually change. And then also, if you're working on mobility or flexibility, which is, just again, it's kind of form of strength work. Some people would say it's true strength work. We're working on end ranges depending on the drill. You do really aim towards, either sets and reps. Or for example, I'm doing single leg compression to strengthen my hip flexion. I'm going to do 2 to 3 rounds of 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and so on. Okay, or you can do 8 to 10 reps. So those are general guidelines for your sets and reps. Again, you can play here. Just one more thing that I like here that I forgot to mention is that I actually don't have in my notes, but I just remembered, is once you stall and plateau in certain skills, it's really great to add EMOMs or AMRAPs. So it's just a kind of, I believe it comes from CrossFit. EMOMs means every minute on the minute. So for example, you pick a skill, let's say you do ring muscle up. You can do like 1 to 2 reps consistently, and you put a timer, 8 to 10 minutes, and you do 1 rep of relatively high effort skill or movement at the beginning of each minute. Then you rest for the remaining duration of the minute, and then when the next minute starts, you start again. Okay, so it's a great way to build some volume, to build some reps and sets while having really good time frame. It really helps you to be in the zone. You can also combine it with upper lower body exercise. For example, you start with the weighted chin up, and then minute number 2, do weighted dip, and so on. Or you can do a pistol squat and so on. And then AMRAP is as many reps or as many rounds as possible. You put a timer, for example, I used to do, let's say, 15 minutes timer, and I do handstand push-ups. So, or any other skill that you can do maybe consistently for 1, again, maybe 2 reps. You do as many reps of that skill, that specific skill during that time, just being mindful to kind of record that number, having mini breaks in between, so you're relatively still fresh. And then once in a while, every other session, try to beat that number, repeating the number or maybe even beating it. So it's a really great way to build some reps if you struggle kind of getting more reps of certain exercise. Okay, so this is sets and reps. So building up a session. How are you going to structure a session? So let's say you start with warm-up. Any session, if you have common sense, you will warm up. Warm-up should be specific to the session, to the work you're going to do during your session. And I'm going to be completely transparent. I sometimes like to have long warm-ups just because it really makes me, and I also have lots of free time because it really makes me feel good. And sometimes I'll do the movements that are not even maybe perhaps relevant to the session that I'm going to do. This is purely because I have time and I enjoy them. That being said, if I lack time, if I really want to get into the zone, let's say I'm doing heavy lower body session, even if it's, let's say back squat, deadlifts, and then I'm going to do some side splits or pancake work, I will warm up with barbell, with bodyweight squats, or maybe just with the barbell squats for like 8 to 10 reps, empty barbell squats. Okay, that's going to be my warm up starting from there. So really getting straight into it. So make it short, 3 to 5 minutes, stay fresh for the work ahead. Okay, it doesn't need to be a big warm up. Avoiding passive stretches, adding more kind of swinging work for the legs, more active movements, replicating. Again, I'm doing straddle good mornings, I'm doing single leg deadlifts. I kind of replicate something that I'm going to do in this session, and I just want to reduce the intensity and do it for a certain number of reps or for time, and then we're going to move on. Okay, so just be mindful of that. If you're doing handstands, obviously you're going to prep your wrists. Never skip the wrist warm up. And with Kali work, shoulders, you can never go wrong with warming up shoulders properly. Bit of push, bit of hanging, scapular shrugs, and so on, as an example. So once you did warm up and keeping it fairly simple, then you can start, because quite often I will include skill work here because 90% of the time, people that work with me, I program some skill work depending on their goals. So this should be time straight after warm up. First 5, 10, max 15 minutes, again, depending on the time. Once you're still fresh, your central nervous system is fresh, you want to do your skill work. And that can be handstands, maybe you're going to work towards press to handstand, maybe working on handstand push-ups and so on. So skill work will be here, okay? Again, being mindful, it's kind of sub-max effort, depending on your skill, something that you can still kind of stay relatively clean with your form, just because you're picking up, good habits, and you're working on the skill itself. After skill, so warm up skill, well, once you're fresh, then you're going into your primary kind of strength and capacity work. And that's either going to be, depending on your goals, depending on your training split, it's either going to be like upper lower, or maybe it's going to be upper body split, weighted chin-ups, weighted dips, or chin-ups dips, or maybe chin-ups and Cossack squats, for example, if you're doing upper lower. Usually I like to play with antagonistic muscle groups here, just so you do one exercise and then maybe 20 to 30 seconds pause in between, then you do another exercise, and then after that, after completing superset, which is great for time saving purposes, then you rest for like 2-3 minutes and so on. Okay, so hope that's clear. One thing that I wanted to mention here, once you get to a certain level, for example, if I'm doing currently overhead press with the barbell, once I started kind of getting into heavier weights for me, like for example, I'm 71 kilo, now I'm getting into 65 kilo presses. It is quite close on some sessions to my max effort, so I don't want to superset with anything, because I know that I want to stay fresh for this kind of strength drill. So I want to treat it, I do 4 or 5 sets of this without supersetting, just so I can focus, so it doesn't suffer. And after that, I'm going to do the other work. If I'm doing lighter day, if it's lighter load, then I can superset this. I can combine it with, for example, pull-ups or weighted pull-ups. Otherwise, one would affect the quality of other drill. Hope that makes sense. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of strength part of the session. You can also do here like barbell squats, deadlifts. Usually I like to keep deadlifts, especially if they're heavy, towards the end of the session. If you're combining deadlifts and squats, just an example, you probably won't be able to go heavy on both unless you're beast and on a certain level. For example, my heavy squats are my current goals. With the deadlifts, I'm always going to go lighter. I'm going to do RDL variation. And every once in a while, if I'm doing like a lighter squat session, I might go like 3 sets of 3 reps of very heavy barbell deadlifts. Okay, so hope that also makes sense. So warm up, skill work, then strength and capacity work. How many sets and reps, entirely dependent on your goals and your split that you chose. Then after that, I would go into decreasing the intensity of the exercise and add more volume and kind of hypertrophy accessory work. So it's either rowing variation, cable rows, bent over rows. Maybe it's lighter, like squat variation. Maybe it's lunges, so you bias one single leg at a time, and so on. Maybe it's bicep curls, side shoulder raises, and so on. So this is push-ups, bench press, lighter bench press with the dumbbells. So this is something that you can do here, usually 2-3 rounds. I'm going to be completely honest, by this stage, quite often, if my strength work it was very strong, and maybe I was allowing a bit more rest, and I'm running out of time here, I wouldn't skip accessory work, but I would rather do 2 sets of like 2 to 3 exercises max, but really pushing hard, going close to failure, 1 to 3 reps kind of staying in reserve, or maybe not even that, 0 reps in reserve on each set, just so I save time. So I think that's a really good kind of tactic as well, rather than doing 3 to 4 rounds and then again doing way too much work. Okay, keeping it intense and for less sets. And then kind of recently, again, totally and completely anecdotal evidence, I used to do mobility and flexibility work. For example, pancake stretches, splits work at the very kind of beginning of the session after warm-up, maybe combined with like handstands or skill work, or maybe before skill work. But recently I've noticed doing it post-heavy lifting really kind of opened new doors, and maybe there's something with priming in central nervous system, but the range was much more accessible and deeper and kind of better from session to session with clear improvements post heavy, like for example, leg work. If I'm working on hip flexibility, post strength work, it felt much better. Again, this is something you can play with, especially if you're someone that's sitting a lot and then you're doing lower body work and maybe you want to do some mobility work at the beginning, might be quite useful. Okay, so you can play with this. Again, this is just personal kind of anecdotal evidence. And then cardio, this is a kind of interesting one. Only relatively recently, my first love in my training was running. Only relatively recently, after like 15 years of not running, I reintroduced running for like once per week. Every Sunday I go like 5K, 6K, easy run, and it really transformed completely the way my energy level and the way I train. So I'm happy I introduced this. That being said, I do have some clients that, often they're preparing for certain competitions and then they want to run a bit more throughout the week. That's fine. Just be mindful, if you want to get better with running, you want to do more running. So that means quite often if you start running 2-3 times per week, it will affect the quality of your other work. There's no denying that. Obviously, you're going to have to reduce the intensity of your overall strength work as running is becoming a priority. Okay, so I would always try to do running or some other cardio sessions in general. I would do them ideally on other days in between strength sessions. If you really need to do it on these days, for example, I would do it after upper body day. Okay, or doing strength first and then run afterwards, or any cardio afterwards if you really need to. Obviously reducing the intensity of cardio. Again, ideally you want to do it separately on another day just so you can really have good recovery. And yeah, this is where we're coming to now. So recovery, something that I really learned the hard way. So sleep, drinking enough water, eating enough food, high in protein, and being mindful of that will transform your training. So I think if you're someone that's consistent with training, the progress will be there. But if you lack, if your program is great, if you really think your program is great, but you sleep 4 to 5 hours per night, unless you're a new parent, obviously, we all have different times in our lives where we need to modify training. Your training will suffer, if that's the case. Prioritize recovery. It will change your training. Speaking from experience, once I started eating more, training less, sleeping more, taking some creatine, for example, as a supplement, it really transformed my training for better. Okay? Again, depending on your level, your starting point, your strengths and weaknesses, you might be different, but training recovery is as important as your training stimulus. Okay? Because if you're training heavy, but you're not recovering heavily, you won't make any progress. If anything, you're just asking for injury, burnout, and so on. So really, really just be mindful of that. And on some days, there's so many things today, that people do for active recovery, sauna, cold plunges, this and that. Honestly, good recovery can be just, spending a day being lazy on the sofa, being couch potato, playing games, reading a book, watching a movie. I don't know, there's something about this modern society and modern times where we forced to think like, okay, constantly you need to do something. Well, I'm feeling guilty if I'm just lying in the bed. I'm not productive enough. I mean, I really don't buy into that crap. So listen to your body. Maybe you want to go for a hike. That's fine. Maybe you crave, as we're all complex social beings with thoughts and feelings. Maybe you would really benefit on going on the gigs with friends. Maybe you want to go in a pub, have a few pints with your friends. That can also be your recovery. Okay, so we're all different. So rather than necessarily just healing crystals, cold plunges, sauna. These are all fine. Just don't go into extremes. Okay, so be mindful of recovery. Sleeping, eating, drinking, you'll be fine if you're training regularly. And then every once in a while, some people I know, again, they're a bit too obsessed with this, testing. You want to test the waters. Something that I forgot to mention at the very beginning, testing, depending on your goals, can be a really good way to kind of establish where you currently are. Testing your 1RM, your one max rep of the lift that you can lift, if you can do that. But don't necessarily, or how many reps you can do. This can be just a nice kind of general reference point. Don't get too obsessed with that. It can be a great way to kind of have a benchmark that you can work towards and pass it, and increasing the benchmarks, and then retest. But don't get too obsessed with it, because again, we're all different and it will vary. So during the training process, I would say every 4, maybe 6 weeks, once you have a deload session, make sure to retest, be fresh for that, and just kind of making sure the deload sessions, something again that's very important. I used to give weekly deloads every 4 to 5 weeks, which is still a nice approach, but I think it's aimed towards kind of more professional athletes, people that are playing like seasonal sports. Honestly, right now in my programming, I just tell people deload when needed. Deload is just a fancy word of saying you want to accumulating good stress, and then at some point you want to make sure you can actually recover sufficiently before again adding more stress. And that means working, either doing 50% less what you usually do on that specific day, maybe completely skipping session and doing gentle mobility session, maybe doing some hiking, some jogging. That's fine. Something that's much lighter. And sometimes during this period also it's good to actually do some testing if it feels good. So just be mindful of that. So yeah, making sure you deload regularly and then test occasionally, but make sure not every week you have a need to test something and do max efforts. Be mindful, use common sense, okay? Checking my notes here. How are we doing with time? I think we're still good. Plateaus. So something that we will all experience at some point. Plateaus, progress is stalling, you're losing motivation. Just remember, it's a feedback from your body, and it's not necessarily a failure. It's not a failure, it's a feedback. Okay, so it usually tells you need to adjust few parameters. So it's either increasing frequency of certain drills. So just for an example, my overhead press was completely stalled for like a month or two until I was training it 2 times per week, one heavier, one lighter session, until I decided, you know what, I'm going to introduce one extra session, kind of medium intensity session with lighter weight, but doing slightly more reps. And after like a week or 2 of introducing extra, kind of adding more work, but being mindful of the intensity of the work, my progress suddenly started going up. So that's something that can be quite helpful in increasing frequency, but just make sure you can still recover. Maybe changing tempo, reducing the load, changing tempo, so doing a slower eccentric, slowing down portions, maybe changing the order of the exercise within session. So rather than doing going back to overhead press, as it's kind of my current one of main goals is pressing my body weight. I'm getting quite close. Rather than supersetting, initially I was supersetting with weighted chin-ups, just kind of going okay at the beginning, and then it plateaued. And once I started going to higher weights, heavier weights, I decided to remove weighted chin-ups, to putting it later in the session, and really prioritizing the overhead press at the beginning, and progress was there. So just being mindful of that. So changing tempo, changing frequency, reducing the load, maybe changing grip, changing alignment slightly, angle can make a world of difference. And then quite often, because this is a very common mistake, training volume, if you have a lot of work, lots of reps, lots of sets throughout the week, maybe give yourself a phase of just reducing junk volume, which can sometimes be quite good, depending on your goals. Reducing the volume, but kind of increasing the intensity perhaps can really be a great way to then kickstart your progress again. So again, plateaus will happen with everyone. It's just the way how you approach it. Then start kind of brainstorming. Don't change too many parameters, but start changing a few training parameters in your programming that I mentioned, and also going back to previously discussed recovery. Make sure recovery is on point. So if changing the program, updating the program, when and how. So if your program is working and you notice, okay, I'm being consistent, I'm making decent progress from month to month, week to week, how often you should change this? Because you want to change some bits here and there. In this specific case, if everything is working, have minimal changes, because if your program works, there's no need in constantly every month, every 5-6 weeks changing something. Keep it going. Adjust maybe tiny bit some parameters, but no need to change. And then on the other hand, if the program is really after like 4 or 5 weeks it's not working, or maybe give it 8 weeks, then okay, let's change a few bits to try something else. Okay, so also boredom can be fairly like a good also indicator your program can be changed. Again, you can still do the same exercise, but change the reps and sets, change maybe the way you do the exercise, play with alignment, play with speed, and so on. Okay, so give yourself a mini challenges. Okay, so yeah, if it's working, keep going. If you're bored, change a few bits, reps, variation, intensity. But in general, the more and more I'm teaching, the more and more I'm programming, the less big kind of changes from phase to phase, training phase to phase would I give to people. Okay, and even now, again, going back to myself, it's important to walk the talk. Current program that I'm doing, I have a few alterations, minor alterations in reps and sets, but I've been keep doing same like 4 or 5 exercises for the last 6-7 months since the beginning of this year, and yeah, I'm making really good progress, and I'm planning to keep this till the end of the year. And that's something also that I want to mention. It's very important, especially if you're working with more complex skills. Don't think about your training in weeks. Think about months, several months, or even years. Okay, that's crucial. Okay, so going back to like kind of related to plateaus and also progress. Progress is not linear. You are not a spreadsheet. Life will happen. Your energy will fluctuate. Sometimes you might need to skip a few days, maybe even a few weeks. No worries. Just get back into it. Eventually, gradually introduce more load. Maybe you're going to get injured. You need to change a few bits. Be kind to yourself. Especially as you work on certain skill, it's very hard to unlock certain skill, for example, handstands. But once you get to a certain level, and even if you need to skip a few days, maybe even a month, you might be rusty for the first few sessions once you get back into the training, but you will get it back very quickly, especially once you kind of create those neural connections. You will get back to that skill and your strength very quickly. It takes longer to develop, but then once it's there, you can get back to it very quickly. And something I need to remind myself quite often. Okay. And even if I go on a trip, now I'm going on a festival for a week, I know I'm not gonna be able to train. There's a tiny voice in my head. It's like already, I won't be able to train. I'm gonna lose all my gains, and I'm making really good progress. That's just ridiculous. And I know for a fact this rest is actually going to be beneficial. I just need to adjust my mindset when I get back to training. I need to start lighter, not aiming to do my PRs like first 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks. Just gradually reintroducing more load and get back into it very quickly. And usually I have the best sessions ever once that period is gone. Okay. So progress is not linear. Quite often skills and strength training is going to be like this. It's going to be like this. With the handstands again, I really like as an example because you can have very high highs and very low lows, and you can have very long periods of very low lows, and then just when you want to give up, you fed up, suddenly you make like months of improvement. This is where consistency really matters, because the harder the skill, the more kind of progress you start to make, the longer it will take for the next kind of jump in progression of certain exercise for you to do. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Consistency. This is a very cheesy thing to say, but it really, you can have the shittiest program in the world, but as long as you follow it, you can make quite a good progress. And something, again, that I've seen so many times with so many clients, they give up way too soon, me included. I start following a program, honeymoon period phase, when it's finished 2-3 weeks, poof, or maybe you're good for like a month or two, and then once you hit a plateau or wall, rather than troubleshooting and kind of starting to reframe a few bits, you just give up completely. So just be mindful of that. This is where consistency and kind of good habits are important. So sometimes if I'm not feeling it, I will have to reflect on what's working, what's not working before giving up, before changing. Give yourself a few weeks, few months, not few weeks, before actually then seeing, okay, well, what do you need to change, or do I want to give up? And that's something that's, the program being meaningful is very important. If it's not meaningful to you, at the end of the day, if you're training because of the guilt or because of the excessive comparison, it will not work. It needs to be something that you find fun. Not necessarily always fun, but it is a big factor, let's be honest. That's going to make it sustainable. And if you show up on a day-to-day basis throughout months, years, you will stick around, because this is something that I want to do. I always start for myself. This is something that I want to do for as long as possible in my life. Obviously, intensity of the training and the skills I do will change, but it's something that I want to do for as long as possible, because I love it, the way it makes me feel, and the way it makes me move in a way. So just be mindful that it needs to be mindful. Okay. Briefly, kind of retracing back something that I forgot to mention in the session structure: cooldowns. I know some coaches like cooldowns, passive stretching at the end of the session, some excessive mobility. Honestly, in my programming, I just put do something that you find fun, do something that you find beneficial. Otherwise, once you finish with your accessory work, that's it. Move on. Your session is finished. You don't necessarily need, despite what Mandy would say, you don't need long periods of cool downs. It's not gonna drastically reduce your injury prevention and injuries and so on. So just be mindful of that. If you want to stretch a little bit at the end of your session, fine. Absolutely. If it feels nice, great, do it if you have time. But if you're short on time, absolutely no need for that. So, hope this was clear. Making sure, just we summarize again from the beginning. So start with your goals. Goal setting. Start where you are. Meet yourself. Meet yourself where you currently are. Be realistic in terms of what your energy and what your schedule actually allows to do. And you really want to tailor the program towards you. And keep it simple to begin with. That will help long term. Set the split training, upper, lower, full body, depending on your goals, depending on your time, depending on what you find meaningful. Sets and reps, it matters. It doesn't matter. Be consistent. Play with these parameters. Stick to certain. Don't play with it too much. Stick with certain modality for a while so you can actually see some improvement. At least like 6 to 8 weeks. Deload as needed, and then if necessary, change a few bits. Okay, unless everything is working nicely. Okay. So yeah, it should be meaningful. You should be consistent. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple and stupid. Always good way to do it. Be mindful of your recovery. So at the end of the day, all these insights, maybe some people expect some maybe groundbreaking new findings, some groundbreaking new thing that I do differently than others don't. No, these are all proven methods that work. They work up until they don't. We're all different. Okay, so this is why it should be very individual and tailored towards you. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you find it meaningful, me blabbering about this. I always like geek around about training, so I can talk about this all day long with like-minded individuals. So yeah, hope you liked it. Please comment, share your own experiences. It would be nice. So yeah, subscribe if you like the video, comment, share, and yeah, I'm off to festival next week, tomorrow actually, till next week, and yeah, looking forward seeing you on the other side. Take care.